Competition among species. Competition is a natural occurrence between organisms occupying the same space at the same time. It occurs when the capability of the environment to supply resources is smaller than the potential biological requirements, so that organisms interfere with each other. Plants, for example, often compete for access to a limited supply of nutrients, water, sunlight, and space. Two main types of competition exist. Intraspecific competition occurs when individuals of the same species vie for access to essential resources, while interspecific competition occurs between different species. Studies show that intraspecific competition can regulate population dynamics because when individuals become crowded as a population grows, resources will become more limited. Some individuals, typically small juveniles, eventually do not acquire enough resources and die or do not reproduce, thus reducing population size and slowing population growth. Interspecific competition, on the other hand, can not only alter the sizes of many species' population at the same time, it can also result in the extinction of a local species. Many experiments have suggested that competing species cannot coexist because the best competitor will exclude all other competing species. The concept of competitive exclusion arose from the work of G.F. Gause, a Russian ecologist who raised in test tubes two different species of Paramecium, a single-celled, ciliated protozoan that feeds on bacteria. Both species thrived when raised alone, reaching some limit set by the volume of the test tube and the supply of bacteria. Yet, when raised together, the growth rate was slowed for both until one species declined and the other then grew to the capacity of the test tube. Evidently, these two ciliates were competing for a limited resource, sharing the same niche, and competition determined that only one persisted. This study was influential in establishing the fact that competition could occur and could eliminate one species from a shared environment. Gause then formed the competitive exclusion principle, which states that species with ecologically identical lifestyles and resource needs cannot coexist over the longer term, and the competitively less fit species will be displaced by the better fit species. While such laboratory studies lead to the formation of the competitive exclusion principle, field observations suggest that niche differences, while sometimes subtle, are invariably found between coexisting species. Joe Connell studied barnacles, shelled marine organisms that live on rocks along European coastlines in 1961 and found that two barnacle species, Balanus and Chathamalus, can coexist because they differ in two traits: growth rate and vulnerability to desiccation. Barnalus's growth is rapid, which allows it to smother and crush the slower-growing Chathamus. Balanus, however, is vulnerable to desiccation and mainly lives in the lower intertidal zone. In contrast, Chathamus can tolerate dry conditions and hence can live in the upper intertidal zones, even to the point where some individuals are just submerged during wave surges at the highest tide. Consequently, even the Balanus is a better competitor for space. These barnacles coexist because Chathamus can survive in areas that Balanus cannot survive. This, and many other examples, actually support the competitive exclusion principle. Species can only coexist if they have different niches. competition is likely to result in evolutionary divergence and specialization among closely related species. This occurs because the individuals of a species with traits similar to competing species always experience strong interspecific competition. These individuals have less reproduction and survival than individuals with traits that differ from their species. Consequently, they will not contribute many offspring to future generations. The Galapagos finches appear to be good examples of such divergence. Two finch species, Geospiza fuliginosa and Geospiza fortis, can be found alone or together on the Galapagos Islands. Studies show that when the G. fortis and G. fuliginosa are present on the same island, the G. fuliginosa tends to evolve a small beak and the G. fortis tends to evolve a large beak. The observation that competing species traits are more different when they live in the same area than when competing species live in different areas is called character displacement. For the two finch species, beak size was displaced. Beaks became smaller in one species and larger in the other species. Studies of character displacement are important because they provide evidence that competition plays a very important role in determining ecological and evolutionary patterns in nature.